There comes a moment in life when truth arrives uninvited, quiet, undeniable, and piercing. It does not knock loudly, nor does it announce itself with chaos. Instead, it settles in the deepest corners of the heart where denial once lived and begins to whisper a reality that can no longer be escaped. This is the moment when someone finally realizes that in trying to protect themselves, they have destroyed something sacred, something pure, something that may never return. You see, when love is offered with sincerity, it carries a divine essence. It is not just emotion, it is responsibility, presence, and truth. But an avoidant heart does not always recognize this in the moment. It sees closeness as danger, vulnerability as weakness, and commitment as a loss of freedom. So instead of embracing what was given, it retreats, it withdraws. It builds walls so high that even love cannot climb them. And while this distancing feels like safety at first, it is actually the beginning of loss. Because on the other side of those walls was someone who chose you fully, deeply, and without hesitation. Someone who stayed when it was hard, who understood when it was confusing, who loved even when they were not loved the same way in return. But even the strongest hearts have limits. Even the most patient souls reach a point where they must choose themselves over the pain of being unseen. And when they finally walk away, silence begins. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that echoes, the kind that forces reflection, the kind that reveals everything that was ignored. That is when realization begins. It comes in waves, memories of moments that were dismissed, words that were not said, chances that were never taken. It comes with the heavy understanding that love was there and it was real, but it was not honored. And suddenly, the very distance that once felt comforting becomes unbearable. Because now there is no one to reach out to, no one waiting, no one trying. This is the cost of emotional avoidance, the price of choosing fear over connection. But understand this, realization is not punishment, it is awakening. It is the soul being called to truth. It is the moment where growth becomes possible, if one is willing to face it with humility. Because the greatest tragedy is not losing someone. The greatest tragedy is realizing their value only after they are gone. In this moment, a battle begins within. The ego tries to justify, to protect, to explain away the past, but the heart knows. It knows what was lost. It knows what could have been. And it knows that some opportunities are not meant to return. This is where wisdom must be born. True growth does not come from regret alone. It comes from accountability, from understanding that love requires courage, that connection demands presence, that pushing people away does not protect you, it isolates you. And perhaps the deepest lesson of all is this: love is not something you can pause and return to later. It is not something that waits forever while you figure yourself out. When it is real, it must be met with equal truth, equal effort, equal openness. Otherwise, it fades, not because it was weak, but because it was not nurtured. So, when realization finally comes, let it transform you. Let it break the patterns that kept you distant. Let it teach you that vulnerability is not your enemy. It is your doorway to meaningful connection. And if life ever gives you another chance, whether with someone new or through a different path, do not repeat the same mistake. Do not let fear silence your heart again, because the pain of opening up is temporary, But the pain of realizing you destroyed something beautiful that can stay with you forever. There is a quiet kind of awakening that does not arrive with noise or chaos, but with absence. It begins the moment someone you once had constant access to becomes a distant memory. Their voice, once familiar, is now replaced by silence. Their presence, once steady, is now nothing more than an echo in your mind. And in that stillness, something shifts. You begin to notice what is no longer there, and more importantly, what you failed to value when it was. At first, the mind resists. It tries to normalize the distance, to convince you that this is what you wanted, that space was necessary, that detachment was strength. But over time, the truth starts to seep in through the cracks of that illusion. You realize that the silence you once created to feel safe has now become something you cannot escape. It surrounds you, not as peace, but as a reminder of messages left unanswered, of moments when someone reached out and you pulled away, of times when love stood in front of you, asking only to be received, and you turned your back. And now there is no one left to reach out. This is where the awakening deepens. When you begin to understand that their absence is not accidental, it is the result of accumulated distance. It is the consequence of emotional unavailability, repeated too many times. You start to see that they did not leave suddenly. They left slowly, piece by piece, each time they felt unseen, unheard, and unvalued. The silence now carries their pain, and in that realization, something within you begins to break, not in a destructive way, but in a revealing way. You begin to feel the weight of what was once light. You begin to see clearly what was once blurred by fear and avoidance. The connection you took for granted now appears rare, almost sacred, and the effort they gave, which once seemed ordinary, now feels extraordinary. You remember how they tried, how they stayed longer than most would, how they offered understanding when you gave confusion. And suddenly, their patience is no longer invisible. It becomes the very thing you wish you had honored. But the most difficult part of this awakening is not just recognizing their absence. It is recognizing your role in creating it. Because deep down, you know it didn't have to end this way. You know there were moments when you could have chosen differently. You could have spoken instead of staying silent. You could have leaned in instead of pulling away. You could have acknowledged their love instead of questioning it. But fear held you back. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of losing control. Fear of being seen too deeply. And now, that fear has cost you something real. This delayed awakening is not immediate because avoidance delays truth. It pushes it aside, buries it under distractions, and masks it with temporary comfort. But truth is patient. It waits, and when it finally arrives, it brings clarity that cannot be ignored. In the end, the silence becomes your teacher. It teaches you that presence is not guaranteed, that love must be recognized while it exists, that pushing someone away does not make you stronger. It only ensures that one day you will have to face the emptiness you created. And by the time you fully understand this, the one who once filled that silence is already gone. Regret is a quiet, heavy companion that often arrives only after the damage is done. It does not rush in with urgency. It seeps slowly, settling in the spaces left vacant by choices that cannot be undone. When emotional distance transforms into permanent loss, the weight of regret becomes undeniable. You begin to see the truth of what was lost, not in fleeting moments of thought, but in the constant, persistent absence that echoes through every part of your life. Every memory that once brought warmth now carries a shadow of what could have been, of opportunities ignored, of love dismissed, of trust broken. At first, it manifests subtly. You may find yourself recalling simple gestures that were once ordinary, a smile, a touch, a word of encouragement. In the past, these moments may have seemed trivial, almost forgettable, but now, each memory arrives with an almost cruel clarity, reminding you that the foundation you took for granted was built on unwavering patience and care. You see that the presence you once thought was endless was finite, and that by pushing it away, you were slowly sealing your own fate. Regret carries a particular sharpness when it is born from avoidance. Unlike impulsive mistakes, which may be corrected with effort or apology, the consequences of emotional withdrawal are often permanent. A heart that was once open and trusting may close forever when repeatedly met with detachment. You begin to recognize that in choosing to guard yourself, you inadvertently inflicted the deepest wound on someone who offered themselves fully. The realization is bitter. The very walls you built to protect yourself became the instruments of someone else's heartbreak, and they may never be dismantled. This weight of regret does not spare the mind or the spirit. It manifests in what-ifs and maybes, in endless replay of past interactions, each one dissected for a chance to see where things went wrong, to imagine where you could have acted differently. But no amount of reflection can summon back what has already slipped away. The heart you ignored or took for granted cannot be forced into forgiveness simply because you now understand its value. Love, once neglected, leaves a void that echoes far louder than any lesson learned afterward. Yet, within this painful awareness lies a powerful teaching. Regret, though heavy, is a call to truth. It forces introspection, demanding that you confront the patterns that led to loss. It asks you to see how fear, avoidance, and self-protection often masquerade as strength when in reality they are the root of your own isolation. This understanding is both a burden and a gift. The burden is the weight of what cannot be undone. The gift is clarity, a rare, transformative awareness that will guide every future relationship, every choice, every attempt at connection. Ultimately, the pain of regret serves as a mirror, reflecting both what was destroyed and what can still be learned. It reminds you that love is fragile, that absence leaves permanent imprints, and that every act of withdrawal carries consequences beyond the self. The heart may be broken, but wisdom emerges from that fracture, teaching that presence, honesty, and courage and love are not optional. They are essential. And if that lesson is truly absorbed, it ensures that future love will not be taken lightly, and the sorrow of permanent loss will transform into a guide for life itself. There is a profound moment when the veil of self-protection begins to lift and the heart realizes the destruction it has caused in the pursuit of safety. Self-preservation is an instinct, deeply rooted in the soul, meant to shield us from pain and betrayal. Yet, when it becomes the dominant force in relationships, it does not simply guard, it isolates. The very mechanisms intended to protect oneself can become instruments of harm, cutting through the connections that were meant to sustain and nurture. What was intended as, say, feti transforms into destruction, and the weight of that realization is almost unbearable. At first, the mind struggles to reconcile the two truths, that you acted to protect yourself, and yet In doing so, you inflicted pain. There is a dissonance between intent and impact. Your actions may have seemed justified, rational even, in the moment. You told yourself that distance would prevent heartbreak, that withdrawal would maintain control, that avoidance would shield you from vulnerability. But the heart you left behind, patient and giving, experienced none of this as strategy. It felt abandonment. And slowly, the realization dawns that in trying to preserve your own peace, you destroyed something irreplaceable. The awareness is subtle at first, emerging in quiet reflections or in the sudden emptiness that greets you when the other is gone. You begin to see how every retreat, every emotional withdrawal, every attempt to avoid closeness chipped away at the bond you once had. You begin to recognize the cumulative effect of seemingly small decisions, the way habitual avoidance eroded trust and intimacy. Each act that felt protective in isolation is revealed as part of a pattern that ultimately severed the connection entirely. The protective walls, once a source of comfort, are now a prison that keeps you from the love you once took for granted. This realization carries both shame and sorrow. Shame, because the truth is undeniable. Love was offered freely, patiently, and unconditionally, yet it was met with avoidance, sometimes indifference. Sorrow, because the consequences are permanent. The heart that was destroyed may never fully return, and the opportunity to heal what was broken may be lost forever. It is a confrontation with the limits of control. The very actions meant to prevent pain have created the deepest form of loss. The irony is almost cruel, yet it is undeniably instructive. But within this pain lies the potential for growth. Understanding that self-protection can be destructive teaches a profound lesson about balance, humility, and responsibility. It is a call to cultivate courage, to face vulnerability not as a threat, but as a gateway to true connection. It is a reminder that love requires presence, engagement, and sometimes risk. Protecting oneself at all costs may preserve the ego, but it cannot preserve the soul, nor can it sustain meaningful relationships. The realization, though painful, is an invitation to transform fear into awareness and avoidance into conscious choice. In the end, the lesson is clear. Safety without connection is an illusion. True protection comes not from walls, but from discernment and understanding. The destruction wrought by avoidance is not irreversible, but it is instructive. It teaches that guarding the heart too tightly can inadvertently harm others and ultimately oneself. The heart, when opened with wisdom, finds not only safety, but fulfillment, a harmony between vulnerability and strength, presence and protection, love given and love received. There is a unique kind of pain that arrives when someone realizes that the love they once had was never fully received or returned. Love, by its nature, is expansive and generous. It does not demand perfection. It does not impose conditions, and it often sacrifices quietly, expecting little in return. Yet, when it meets avoidance, fear, or withdrawal, it becomes a mirror reflecting what was never acknowledged, never honored, and ultimately never cherished. The heart that gives deeply and freely is left with echoes of what could have been, while the one who avoids connection may not fully grasp the weight of what was lost until it is gone. The moment of realization is piercing. It often begins with reflection, a subtle recollection of the small acts of care, attention, and devotion that were overlooked. It may be a memory of staying awake to listen, of showing up when no one else would, of offering reassurance and comfort without complaint. These gestures, though seemingly ordinary, were profound expressions of love. And yet, in their absence of reciprocal acknowledgement, they were dismissed or ignored. The realization that such love was met with emotional distance can be devastating, for it forces one to see the gap between intention and reception, between giving and being received. This awareness also carries the weight of what was silently endured. For every act of love given without response, there is a quiet suffering, a subtle heartbreak that accumulates over time. It is not always visible, but it is deeply felt. The giver may have hoped that patience and understanding would bridge the gap, that persistence and loyalty would eventually break through the walls of avoidance. But love cannot force itself into another's heart, no matter how sincere, how patient, how unconditional. It requires recognition, engagement, and reciprocation to flourish. When those are absent, love is unbalanced, and the consequences are profound. The painful truth is that ignoring or undervaluing such love leaves a void that cannot easily be filled. The heart that once expanded so freely now carries caution, hesitancy, and guardedness. The one who failed to receive love fully may eventually feel its absence, not as mere longing, but as a deep sense of loss and regret. They may come to understand that what they dismissed was precious, rare, and transformative, and that its absence leaves a mark that cannot be erased. The awareness that they could have had something beautiful, but instead allowed it to slip away, becomes a heavy burden. Yet within this realization lies a profound spiritual and emotional lesson. It teaches heart love is a responsibility as much as it is a gift. Love must be met with presence, honesty, and openness, or it risks fading into what could have been. It also reminds us that while avoidance may shield us from vulnerability, it simultaneously deprives us of growth, connection, and fulfillment. The unreciprocated love is not a failure of the heart that gave it, but a call for awareness, humility, and transformation for the one who avoided it. Ultimately, this painful recognition is both a mirror and a guide. It reflects what was ignored, and if heeded, can shape how future relationships are approached, with courage, awareness, and gratitude. Love, when received and nurtured, becomes a conduit for joy, understanding, and purpose. And when it is ignored, it leaves a lesson imprinted on the soul that love is sacred, fleeting, and must never be taken for granted. The heartbreak is real, but the wisdom gained is eternal. There is a subtle yet profound struggle that arises when the mind and the heart collide. The conflict between ego and the undeniable truth of what has been lost. The ego, protective and prideful, seeks to justify actions, to rationalize avoidance, and to soften the impact of decisions that caused harm. It whispers that withdrawal was necessary, that emotional distance was a form of self-preservation, that love can always be regained. But the heart, wiser than the mind, often admits, knows otherwise. It feels the absence of what was never fully honored, the void left by a connection that could have been cherished, but was instead neglected. This internal battle is not easily reconciled, for it asks the soul to confront its own contradictions and face the reality that protection and preservation sometimes come at the cost of destruction. The ego fights valiantly to maintain a sense of control. It clings to excuses, pointing to fear, past wounds, or the need for space. It frames avoidance as strategy rather than error, and distance as wisdom rather than loss. In this struggle, there is a temporary relief, a fleeting justification that attempts to dull the sting of regret. Yet, no matter how persuasive these rationalizations may be, they cannot erase the truth that love was mishandled, that patience was met with withdrawal, and that emotional closeness was replaced with walls. The heart, in its quiet persistence, keeps returning to the same unshakable awareness. What was lost was real, and it cannot be rewritten. This internal conflict often manifests as guilt, remorse, and an aching sense of missed opportunity. The mind may argue, I was protecting myself, yet the heart responds, but at what cost? The very measures intended to secure safety paradoxically lead to emptiness. The recognition that fear-driven choices cause permanent loss shakes the foundation of self-perception. No longer can the ego claim superiority or wisdom without acknowledging the pain left in its wake. The confrontation with this truth is not merely emotional, it is spiritual. It forces a reckoning with the principles of love, responsibility, and integrity. In this battle between ego and heart, wisdom begins to emerge. The heart teaches that strength is not the absence of vulnerability, but the courage to face it. It shows that true protection does not come from withdrawal, but from conscious engagement, honesty, and respect for the feelings of another. The ego, once dominant, begins to recognize that avoidance is not a path to freedom, but a barrier to meaningful connection. This realization does not erase the past, but it illuminates the way forward. It invites the individual to embrace accountability, to accept the consequences of past actions, and to cultivate a deeper understanding of love as both gift and responsibility. Ultimately, the inner conflict between ego and truth is a necessary passage for transformation. It teaches that wisdom is born not from justification, but from reflection and humility. It reminds that love is fragile and fleeting, that avoidance has costs beyond self-preservation, and that regret is an invaluable teacher if one chooses to learn. By facing this tension, the heart gains clarity, the ego gains humility, and the soul begins to align with a higher understanding that the true measure of strength lies not in avoidance, but in the willingness to honor love fully, courageously, and without hesitation. There is a lesson in loss that cannot be ignored, a lesson that rises from the ashes of heartbreak and echoes through the chambers of the soul. When love is ignored, postponed, or dismissed, it often leaves a void that cannot be easily filled. This is not merely an emotional truth, but a spiritual one. Love that is offered but not received is a sacred gift wasted, a seed planted in soil that never bore fruit. The heart that gave so freely and openly becomes a teacher, and the one who failed to recognize its value is confronted with the consequences of their choices. In this confrontation lies a divine principle. Every action, every decision, every withdrawal has a cost, and awareness of this cost is the doorway to transformation. The first aspect of this lesson is understanding the finite nature of genuine connection. Love is not infinite. It is given with intention, with patience, and with depth. When it is met with avoidance or indifference, the opportunity for mutual growth diminishes. What was once abundant in presence and warmth becomes absent, leaving only regret and reflection. This teaches a hard truth. Love is a living force that requires reciprocity. It cannot survive solely on one side. It cannot thrive where it is unacknowledged. Ignoring love is not harmless. It diminishes its power and leaves an indelible mark on both giver and receiver. The second dimension of this teaching is accountability. Ignoring or dismissing love does not erase the responsibility one carries for their choices. Every withdrawal, every act of avoidance, every moment of emotional unavailability has consequences that cannot be reversed. The universe has a way of revealing these truths, not as punishment, but as illumination. When the heart is left broken, the lesson becomes visible. The cost of avoidance is often the loss of something truly rare and transformative. It is a call to examine patterns, to recognize fear, and to confront the ways in which self-protection can paradoxically inflict harm on those we care about. Another profound aspect of this lesson is awareness of timing. Love, like life itself, operates within the flow of opportunity. When it is ignored or postponed, it may not wait indefinitely. Hearts that are patient may endure for a time, but eventually, the one who avoids will face the permanence of absence. This awareness teaches the value of presence, the necessity of engagement, and the urgency of recognition. Love that is real demands attention in the moment, lest it vanish and leave only the bitter knowledge of what could have been. Ultimately, the lesson embedded in ignored love is a gift for the soul willing to learn. It teaches humility, empathy, and the importance of honoring emotional truth. It shows that avoidance, though tempting, is never neutral. It has consequences that extend beyond the self, shaping the lives and hearts of others. And it reminds us that love, when treated with reverence and courage, is one of the highest expressions of human existence, a force capable of healing, transforming, and elevating life itself. In embracing this principle, one gains more than regret or sorrow. One gains wisdom. One understands that love is sacred, that connection is precious, and that life's deepest lessons often arrive through the very losses we once thought unbearable. The heart learns that to ignore love is to invite its absence, and the soul realizes that awareness and presence are the truest expressions of both courage and divinity. It is in this understanding that transformation becomes possible, and the pain of loss is transmuted into a lifelong guide for living and loving fully.